Tenet has been trying to raise a substantial sum of money lately, and one thing I've been trying to figure out is exactly how big of dilution we're going to have in those money raises. And then that also led me to digging into what's going on time-wise. So I want to summarize what I've found so far on those two topics. I'll try to quickly go through the dilution and maybe spend a little bit more time on how the timeline's going on their short form prospectus. So I already made a video on the private placement dilution. I won't recap all of this, but we're looking at a little over 6 million shares potentially if all goes well and all the warrants are exercised from the December 13th private placement. And then we have this short form prospectus that we're all waiting to get the final prospectus and for it to close. So just reminding everyone of those terms. There's going to be a unit, and you're also going to get one common share warrant, which is more than normal. Their previous and what I'm used to seeing is a half a warrant with each unit, but they had to give a full warrant. So that kind of sets the math for the dilution. So kind of using their max potential raise of about $30 million, there'd be about a max of 30 million units, which would give straight one common share. There's no debenture here or no conversion. So we're looking at 30 million shares for sure. And then because they're giving one full warrant per unit, there's another 30 million shares if all the warrants are exercised. Okay. So there could be a potential, and I guess we'd want this potential. We want the stock to go up and all the warrants to get exercised. So if all goes well, there'd be about a 60% dilution. So currently there's about 99.5 million shares. So I'm using roughly 100 million shares for my math. So 60 over 100, 60% dilution. Now, one sort of good potential, if things go well, are these warrant money is sort of fairly important. They'd probably go through the 30-ish million less fees in a year. But if it does allow the Canada and then US expansion to go well, the warrants get fully exercised, and that $60 million would hopefully be enough capital to get them through another year or two. It's really hard to project something like being cash flow positive. Seems like an unpredictable quantity at this time. So we had that 6 million shares from the December money raise, another 60 million here. Then I went digging for what else there might be. Now they did do a money raise through a short form prospectus back in July, or closed in July of 2021. There they did 13 million units, and they had that more typical half a common warrant. So there could be about 16.5 million shares coming from 2021. Now I'd assume little of these warrants would have been exercised because the price was so much higher. Okay. Then I kind of went looking for any other possible warrants, anything other substantial. I didn't really find anything substantial in their short form prospectus. They go through share options issued just in the last 12 months. And that came to about 250,000 when I just sort of roughly added them up. So that's not substantial. And I didn't really see anything else substantial. I'm sure I'm missing a little bit. So sort of in summary, the 100 million shares will probably grow to a little north of 180 million if all goes well. So an 80% or more dilution. Again, there's definitely smaller share issues, shares to executives, warrants executives, that it wouldn't be counted there. So substantial dilution, but they need to raise the money. And but the point of this video and this part is just to realize that as shareholders, we're potentially looking at a dilution to us of 50% if the share count doubles, then we have half the ownership that we had before. Now, diving into that earlier short form perspective gave me, an idea of what the timeline looked before, and that's what I want to sort of wrap up with. What was that previous timeline, and then how does that compare to the current timeline? And then I take a look at some other sort of smaller cap companies and what's their timeline at the moment. So the closing date was July 7th of 2021 for that previous perspective. So then I sort of worked backwards from there using CDAR to grab documents. So I just looked in the first 7 months of 2021 and got all their prospective filings. So kind of summarizing these in order, their first short form prospectus was in March 11th, or that's the first one I saw. I didn't go back to 2020. So this would be sort of equivalent to the September filing that we had from Tenet. And then their short form amended was in June. So we just got this in late December. So pretty similar timeline, nothing really shocking here between the original and the amended. And then the final prospectus, which has all the details, there's all these stars. We don't have the dollar amount in the short form prospectus at the moment, came in just sort of a couple weeks later. And this is what we're late on. We're now a bit over a month without the final prospectus. And then 2 weeks later-ish, was the closing of the final prospectus. So again, we're late on that compared to the June 10th date. So I'm a little less concerned going back and looking at the March 11th to June 10th with the September to December dates. It's just things are late now. So then I went diving through a bunch of OCS bulletins to see what's going on with other particularly small cap companies. I'd been noticing little to no emails from Questrade, my broker, about IPOs, and then the account that I am an authorized trader on that I manage for other people through Scotia iTrade. I've been getting no sort of issuance emails, and then all of a sudden the last 2-3 weeks I'm sort of getting an email about a new issuance every few days, it seems like. So things have sort of picked up. So it's the January 5th bulletin that Tenet has their amended short form prospectus listed in. And when I do a search for how many project numbers there was 58 sort of under new IPOs, new issuance, or secondaries. So secondaries like Tenet is doing. Then I wanted to sort of dive into what's going on with the other companies. Now, within this bulletin of the other 58, I sort of looked and compared to how many of those are before or after what I saw with Scotia iTrade under their IPO and new issuance center. And all of these companies are all from the January 5th bulletin. Okay. Now there were 58 of them, okay. And there's certainly not 58 here. I don't know if Scotia will be involved in all of them, but none of these currently were from earlier or later ones. So it seems like this is the right time frame for companies who filed that amendment or their short form prospectus or IPO or an amended one, then to start having them close. Looking in terms of backlog, I went through all the other bulletins more recently, and there seems to be less projects filed. And then I went back in time, and there seems to be a bit of a wave of sort of an up and a drop, and then a up and a drop. But peak or Tenet was certainly in one of the higher batches on that January 5th. So it's sort of very time consuming going through all the bulletins, but I went back to early December and sort of looked at smaller caps and tried to look to see how many had closed. And so these are sort of the companies that I found. I just looked at how much money they're trying to raise and tried to stay in a relatively small cap bracket. So, Brookfield was trying to raise money. That's not even a reasonable comparison to somebody like Tenet, so I didn't look up any of those. And from the December 8th bulletin, in the small cap world, filing dates all pre the 8th, and only one had closed, and it wasn't a secondary, it was an IPO. All the rest, I didn't see anything mentioning about closing. So I just have pulled up CDAR's, the CDAR results for Hawthorne, but I just go to CDAR and look to see if there was a closing or a press release. So that's where I was getting all my data. If it's not on CDAR, then you're not going to close something about it being posted there. So anyway, so I did that for all of these. So it seems like in small cap world, things are just delayed. So what's going on with Tenet is not an abnormal thing. It's probably not a Tenet thing. It's probably just the backlog of coming out of COVID. Now raising money is probably a lot more difficult than it was in 2021. So is it a COVID thing or just harder to raise money? I'm not sure about which. So kind of wrapping things up, the dates sort of from before, the September to December, this is the same. Things are definitely running slower, but they don't seem to be running way slower than what's going on for some other companies. I got to keep diving in, and I'll probably just keep taking watching closely what's going on with other small caps and how long they take to close, and do they close, and is there an issue of things not closing. So at the end of this, for me, I feel a little bit better about what's going on with Tenet. That 3-month delay was kind of concerning me. Less concerned about that, and now more concerned about this greater than 2-week gap. But again, I look into that and it doesn't seem super abnormal. So hopefully in no more than a few weeks to a month, we'll get that final prospectus, and then it'd be pretty shocking, I think, if the final prospectus to closing date is more than a couple weeks, and we'll see how much money they're able to raise between the 200 and the 20 and the $30 million. So hopefully this was helpful for you. If you've done research on sort of what's going on recently with timelines, with small caps and closing their prospectus, I'd love to get comments or even directions of companies that I could go that you think I should dig into. If you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel if you want more content like this.